Hey everyone, before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of my stories. It all kicked off on a dull Sunday afternoon. One of those heavy days when the air feels loaded with things nobody says. My son Alex was just 8, tiny, kind-hearted, the type of kid who'd thank the breeze if it shifted a leaf off his trail. We'd headed to my folks' place, since my brother Mason was in town from his fancy city gig, which in my parents' view meant pulling out all the stops, while their let-down daughter, was merely a side note to his triumph tale. When we got there, my mom hardly glanced my way, but right away yanked Mason into a hug that dragged on forever. "Check out my thriving son," she announced, loud enough for me to catch. "You reek of success." I grinned because that's what I always did. Grinning was less risky than talking in that house. Alex stuck close to me, his fingers gripping my sleeve. Since he sensed it too, those walls weren't a home. They were props for meanness. The day turned into a parade of Mason's wins. He boasted about his ride, his apartment, and how I couldn't hack it a single day in the real world if Mom didn't let me linger. My dad bobbed his head between beer pulls, grumbling. She should have picked up a real skill instead of books and tears. Every comment burrowed under my skin, but I'd mastered staying put. That quiet was my shield. Alex attempted to pitch in. He grabbed Mason's fallen wallet, cleared a spot on the coffee table, but Mason eyed him with fake annoyance. "You're exactly like your mom," he mocked, always apologizing for being alive. My mom chuckled from the kitchen. "Don't be harsh." She tossed out weakly, "He's just a kid." But her grin lingered. Later, when folks were out back, it went down. Mason beckoned Alex over, flashing his glossy black shoes. "These picked up dust," he said. "Clean them." Alex seemed puzzled, stuck in place. "I don't have a rag," he murmured softly. "Use your shirt," Mason barked. My father snickered. "That's how kids build toughness," he claimed. I sensed something inside me snap wide. Alex glanced at me, his eyes begging for guidance. I froze for a beat. That one beat gave Mason time to shove him down to his knees. My boy's small hands shook as he paused. Then, from terror, followed orders. The white material of his shirt went dingy. "Nice job," my mom stated icily from her seat. "That's how you instill respect." My sight fogged with tears, fury, shame all knotted up. I yanked Alex upright, his shirt grimy, his mouth quivering. "We're out of here," I forced out through gritted teeth. My dad snapped. "Park it. Don't you dare. Bolt like you're the hurt one." Mason chuckled. "She always bails when it gets tough." I stared at them, the folks who brought me up, and saw nothing decent remained in that space. Not for me, not for my kid. I stepped out, the door with Alex's hand in mine. He questioned, in the car, "Mom, did I mess up?" I couldn't reply because my throat felt packed with shards. That night, sleep evaded me. Every replay of that instant, my son on the ground, my family giggling, looped like a movie I couldn't stop. I paced the kitchen, trembling, gazing at the sink, brimming with soiled plates. Toughness, they'd called it. I muttered to myself, then they'll discover what toughness truly means. And that's where my scheme took shape. Gradual, calculated, not fancy or meaningful, but solid. The type that strikes back. I skipped returning to that house for weeks. Whenever I shut my eyes, I pictured Alex's tiny hands, grasping his stained shirt, his soft voice murmuring, "Mom, please don't be upset with me." That image burned like acid in my gut. He quit smiling after that day. His sketches shifted. No more homes or bright days, just shadowy scrawls and lone stick people. When his teacher phoned and wondered if trouble was brewing at home, I fibbed. "He's just worn out," I claimed. But I knew the truth. He wasn't worn out. He felt guilty because they convinced him he'd erred by simply being under their feet. Then one night, I received a text from my mother. "Mason's heading over. Again Sunday. You and Alex ought to say sorry for that outburst. Family trumps emotions." I glared at the note until my screen faded. That was the evening. I resolved my quiet days were done. I began by phoning in sick to my job for the first time in ages. I informed my boss. It was a home matter. But really, I required space to plot, to ponder, to mold every bit of hurt into something edged. I wasn't planning to yell or plead. I aimed to force them to swallow the same grime they made my son. Kneel in. On Sunday, I got Alex ready in fresh outfits. I explained we were seeing Grandma once more. But this round, I vowed, you won't end up messy. He eyed me bewildered, but believed me. That belief almost shattered me. But it fueled me too. When we pulled up, the usual cocky grins met us. My mom's tone boomed. Oh, look, the diva is back. My father laughed from his chair. Maybe she's set to apologize. Mason, in yet another pricey top, grinned smugly. I hope you drilled some etiquette into your boy this go-around. I smiled nicely. Truth is, I showed up to thank you guys. They blinked. My mother arched a brow. Thank us for what? For showing me true family values? My voice probably came off odd, because she paused, but Mason jumped in. Yeah. Well, somebody needed to knock you down a peg. I know, I replied gently, placing a shopping bag I'd carried. That's why I brought a treat to pass around. Inside the bag sat a dish. Plain, vintage, sturdy pottery. The very one my mother used for every home dinner. When I was little, I'd loaded it that morning with stuff that resembled chocolate mousse. But it wasn't. It was dirt. Soggy, lumpy, blended with earth. From their own yard. My mom scrunched her nose. What is that? Something you'll all value, I said, placing it on the table. You claimed Alex. Needed to grasp respect. Yeah, that. Toughness meant knowing your spot. My father bent forward, chuckling. What are you up to, kid? Gone nuts? I faced Alex. Honey, recall what Uncle Mason forced you to do last visit? He nodded silently. Do you figure he ought to shine his own kicks today? The room froze. Mason's grin vanished. What the heck are you suggesting? I snatched one of his shiny shoes from by the door. He had my son wipe his with his shirt, so I figured I'd pay it back. My mother rose, face flushed. You flipped. Drop that. But I held on. I positioned the shoe next to the bowl and locked eyes with Mason. Go on. Demonstrate how a true guy says sorry. He laughed uneasily at. First, you're nuts. Perhaps I said, or maybe I'm tired of staying silent. When he balked, I dipped into the bowl and slathered the muck over the shoe's top myself, my hand shaking, but not from scare. You label this toughness, I stated. So let's feel how it hits. Mason yelled, you're gross, and shoved his chair away. But I stepped nearer, my voice dropping. No, what's gross is seeing in. 8-year-old plead not to get punished for existing. Alex jumped when Mason banged his fist on the table. My father got up, but I barked. Sit. My voice boomed like lightning in the room. You all crave control that bad. Well, scan around. You've dropped it. My mother attempted to ease it. You're blowing this up, Sarah. I grinned icily. Then you should have considered that. Before chuckling at a kid shining shoes. Mason tried to bolt, but as he did, I called hold up. He stopped at the doorframe. If you ever approach my son again, I'll ensure your flawless rep gets hauled through every speck of this town's grime. And this round you'll be the one kneeling. My mom inhaled sharply. My dad grumbled. Ingrate. I grabbed Alex's hand and headed for the door. No, I murmured softly, glancing back once more. Just finally liberated. We exited the house quietly. Alex stayed mute for a bit in the car, then softly asked, Mom, were you angry? I smiled amid tears, nobody. I just showed them what respect really is. But that wasn't the finish. That evening, I received a ring from someone surprising. Someone who'd witnessed it all, someone who proposed. Something that could unravel them from within. And I accepted. They returned the following winter. Diminished, nastier, worn thin the way. Cheap material phrase when pulled too much. Rumors trickled out, gradual and subtle, about how I'd pushed back that day. A neighbor brought it up in the store queue. A lady from church lifted a brow and then averted her gaze. I hadn't sought any of that. I didn't crave chatter. I just wanted them to taste a fraction of what they'd forced on my boy's spirit. The call after the dirt event came from Mrs. Jenkins, who managed the town's kids' activities, outings, after-school snacks, the modest grant that allowed children to join music and art sessions. She'd caught the drama at my parents' house. You ought to stop by the hub, she'd said. We're seeking someone to handle the fresh community kitchen, someone who truly gives a damn. Care, she stressed. The words felt like a chance, bundled in a duty that would push me to stand out where they still lurked. I accepted the role. I prepared meals. I coordinated. I figured out volunteer management, how to make every buck go further, how to craft the courteous, steady emails that secured cash for warm food. I pulled late shifts and quick weekends while Alex tackled homework at a corner table with markers and a pad. Folks began spotting the subtle shifts. The kitchen stayed tidier. More youngsters got nourished. The summer lineup packed with important names. I never hoisted a sign saying, "See me." That spotlight had always been theirs, and I skipped it. My strategy wasn't spotlight. My strategy was influence. Subtle, everyday influence. The initial time my parents appeared at the hub, I nearly chuckled. They showed because Mason had gotten axed from a short-term gig and required something reliable to claim he'd been busy. Mom showed up with scented breeze and a plastic sack of stored cookies like a gift. Dad's gate stayed identical, wide, rehearsed, the kind that assumed folks would part. "Can you assist us?" Mom queried me, cheerful as lights. "Mason needs." She listed the fuzzy thing people list when they seek openings, a chance, a slot, a hookup. I eyed her hands, the nails chewed at the tips, and when she grinned, I spotted the decades of superiority and the unpaid debt of decency. I felt zero like victory. I felt the chill, exact thrill of equilibrium. "We've got wait lists," I replied. The line hit like a verdict. Mrs. Jenkins loomed behind me, observing. "Our rule is equity. We can't slot folks just because they insist." I deployed every office term I'd picked up. The proper vibe, the proper gap. They sensed the no already. Their expressions folded like paper crease too often. Mason attempted his former strut. "She's my sis. You'll squeeze him in." "I can't tweak rules." "For kin," I answered. "But we've got volunteer openings free." That bit, volunteer openings, swung what followed. The volunteer spots weren't flashy. They involved arriving at sunrise, scouring pots, mopping the play zone, lugging crates. They were the roles that, if done with a meek grin, rendered you unseen. If done with gripes and noise, everyone stared. I observed. Mason, as he grasped the gig, wasn't a giveaway. He'd always dismissed others' effort. Now he'd supply his own. He signed on with a pinched look and phony confidence. He arrived the first dawn with a tight expression and fancy work boots. He bailed the second dawn with soil stuck to the bottoms because he wouldn't chill inside, while kids required dishes done. The third dawn, he showed on his knees, actually pulling, his hands over the floor wiping a mess. The space was cozy and scented with tomatoes and sautéed onions. Youngsters giggled in a nook because someone had mended the paper plane volcano. Mason's hands were tiny and chapped and average. My mother acted like she wasn't looking. My father dodged the fridges. They approached me for the timetable for the sweet perk of slotting. Alex in the after-school tunes class. That never had spares. I informed them. Courteously, spots go by need and showing up. He wasn't listed. Mom began weeping, bold, theatrical, rehearsed. Dad's tone rose, the familiar bark climbing. He demanded breaks for the old norms that had always been. For them, I'd mastered the norms. I'd mastered letting them crease into the tiny embarrassments that would gradually wear down their assurance. I had zero desire to crush them with a roar. I wanted them to reach and find no footing. When Mason appeared one blustery afternoon, shaking and sorry, I passed him a mop and a bucket and gave him a cloth. He gripped it like it could snap. The children were back, crafting paper ships. Alex sat at a table shading a picture of the hub. With a crimson sun, he glanced up, met my gaze, and beamed. A tiny full uplift. That eased my chest. I nodded. That nod was my sole prize. The weeks after were a gradual fix. Mason had to seek a regular slot. And hold it. Mom rang me, pleading for perks. Could Alex get an early arrival for a day she had chores? I said nope. Dad dropped a message about kin in disgrace, and I erased it. Without hearing, they visited the hub more, lingering because they craved seeing the child, who'd been shamed get cared for, and because they craved watching me flop at compassion. Every time they grabbed for a bypass, tugging connections with another, muttering to a past pal, I firmed a rule or shifted the cutoff or forced them to complete a form that ate time. They lacked when they at last begged me, frantic and fragile, to land. Mason a legit job. I mentioned there was a spot at a nearby vendor the hub used, someone who'd require on-time arrivals, modesty, the skill to take direction. I passed them in form I'd printed myself. It was straightforward. He completed it with a shaky grip. He landed the gig. Because he appeared prompt and handled the tasks he'd once sneered at. He held it. Because he learned to perform without gripe. In time, his strut turned into something steady and low-key. Mom began hauling plastic sacks full of casseroles to the hub on Sundays, gaze lowered as if giving atonement. Dad showed less to boast and more to perch in a nook and scan the news in calm. They phoned, sometimes inquiring about Alex's keyboard lesson times, as if details were pleading. They sought perks I could grant, timetables, volunteer times, a waitlist spot. If they would attend an info meet and say sorry, I required them to attend. I required them to hear the leader discuss respect and limits and group duty. They fidgeted in their seats, uneasy. My mother's lip color smeared at the edges. My father's fingers clenched the handout. The payback wasn't noisy. There were no rants, no pushes to humiliate them. There was just a prolonged, firm readjustment. Their once hit rules. Their meanness hit my steady note of being. On call, I allowed them to observe, forced to aid in small, real ways they used to demand from me. I allowed them to grasp the minor labor of giving, without ruling it. I allowed them to sense the gradual, stubborn ache that stems from needing without right. Months on, my neighbor shared that Mason offered to tidy the hub's yard after a gale. He did it, without word. My mother whipped up a pie for the helpers. Dad handled the folding because one of the usuals had injured his back. These were regular acts, nothing like the huge sorry I might have dreamed up. But regular acts carried heft. They demanded modesty. They required work. On a drizzly morning, as I cleaned the serving counter and Alex assisted plating fruit, my phone hummed. It was a note from Dad. Thank you for aiding him. We're trying. I stared at the words, the mark sparse, the regret stitched into a line. I didn't respond. Instead, I glanced at Alex. He was humming, cans of apples before him. He looked up and grinned, as if the world had just returned something he'd always merited. I felt the warmth in my chest ease into something like calm. They had pleaded before for perks, for notice, for alibis. This time, when they stretched for me, they were stretching for tasks, for gifts, for a decency they hadn't gained. I didn't deny them in rage. I denied them in a fresh tongue, in limits, in no to being there. Welcome Matt, in letting them gain what they craved with their own effort. When they sought pardon, I gave only what I could. A chair at a table with guidelines and a timetable and a spot to gain amends with work and patience. They accepted. It shifted them bit by bit. That evening, after the hub shut and the bulbs dimmed like weary glow bugs, I walked Alex home. He babbled about the garlic bread mix. He wanted to test for the after-school crowd. The sky was crisp and chilly. I reflected on how tiny deeds, scrubbing pots, mopping floors, appearing, had chiseled a divide between my world and theirs that no furious yell could have sliced neatly. I unlocked our apartment door and placed his book bag down. He slipped a marker behind his ear like a trophy. He eyed me earnestly for a moment and said, "Mom, are we good now?" I kissed his brow. "We are," I said. "We're okay." Then I switched off the light and let the place be still, filled with regular stuff that had nothing to do with